Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you. Hey everybody, I just wanted to give you all a little bit of a heads up as to what Bill's going to be starting off this episode talking about. He's going to be addressing the importance of how to set up a raised garden plot and some of the attributes that you'd want to look for when trying to set one up for yourself.
Well, welcome back to In a Nutshell. This is Bill Brush. We're going to go another episode today. It's in the gardening series. This one I'm going to call Preparing Your Garden for Planting. And I talked on one of the previous episodes about how you'd put, your garden together. One of the things I'd like to add to that is making sure that your garden that you're working with, if it's above ground or what we call raised beds, make sure that you have a good 6 to 8 inches of depth to it in the soil that you're preparing for that, putting it together and then mixing in maybe some carbon material, some planting mulch and those kind of things, and mix that in thoroughly in that top 6 to 8 inches. One of the reasons that 6 to 8 inches is kind of the minimum depth is that's about the depth that you can get air to. And if you can get air to a depth of 6 inches, one of the things that will work really well for you is the microbiology, because they need air. They're aerobic microbes that need oxygen to function, so they can only work to the depth that you can get air to. So we want to keep it opened up and nice at that 6 to 8 inches. And a lot of the calculations sometimes that I'll tell you about how deep 6 3/4 inches weighs 2 million pounds in an acre and all those calculations. So it's nice to know you at least have that. And then I can do a lot of things with as we go through these to give you more information about how that'll work and how to make that balanced and amended properly so that it does the best job for you. Now, what happens if you put, a couple of, we'll call them 2x12s, and now all of a sudden I got a depth of 20 inches. For a lot of crops, that will be an improvement because they're more deeply rooted, and it'll help you for their standability so they can get rooted deeper and hold on. They can get moisture from a deeper area when it gets hot. There's just a lot of advantages to it, but it may not be as convenient for you to work on something that's raised that much.
Now Bill's going to get into talking about what you would want to look for if you weren't going to plant your garden in a raised garden plot and you were just going to plant it directly into the soil.
The other thing is just putting it at ground level, the actual soil you have right there where you're going to place your garden. Remember that it could be very compacted, and you might have a nice working depth of 6 or 8 inches that you rototill, or you take a shovel and go down and spade it and turn it over and get it prepared for planting. The problem is that you may find that down deeper below that you have an impervious layer, a hard pan layer, or something that's super compacted. And what you get then, if you're not careful, a little bit of extra water, and now the bottom, if you get 6 to 8 inches, right at 8 inches, and it'll start to back up, it's not draining. And so all of your water is having to be pulled up from now, or pretty soon you're waterlogging all those deep roots, and it won't be near as successful. You get root diseases begin to form. You get anaerobic conditions. There is just a lot of bad things that can happen. So if you're going to do something like that, where you're just planting it, the soil you have right there, it's a blank spot, get you something like a drill or something that you can drill down and auger down to a couple feet at least. And if it's soft and very pliable and the auger goes in good, you should be good to go. But if it's not, then what you may want to do is drill what I would call drainage holes around the outside edge of your plot and down the middle. So this gives you a place for water to go through the soil, and when it hits that layer, it's got some place for that excess water to go and get away from your roots of your vegetables or melons or whatever it is that's in your garden.
Now Bill's going to talk about what the next step in creating your garden is after you've already picked out what type of plot you want, as well as you've worked the ground a little bit to make it a little bit more pliable for a garden.
The next thing, once you've got your ground prepared, and what I mean by that is you have it worked up so that there aren't any big clods, no big hard pieces of hardpan that have been broken off that basically will not be able to put back together. And it's worked up to the point where you can just get that a handful of soil and crumble it, and it all comes back out of your hand. Then you're ready to basically begin to map out your garden. And by mapping it out, it's nice to get a little piece of paper and say, well, this is what I'm mapping out. This sheet of paper is going to represent a 10 by 20 or a 10 by 10 or whatever size you have. And then what you can do on this, because I'm going from experience, I've planted stuff and then I go back and I go, where did I stop there and start there? I forget where my plantings are, and I should be thinning this out more, but is that where it stops and that's where it starts? It just also gives you a very good explanation of what that is. And you may want to plant 2 or 3 different kinds of lettuce that early on look very, very similar, and then all of a sudden that changes, and one will not perform as well because you planted it too close together, didn't thin it out enough. This way you can get all of the details, and you have them in a piece of paper, and it's mapped out for you. That can happen. This is what I use. I can have a map for my winter garden, a map for my spring and early summer, and my map out for the later summer and into the fall. And so it just gives you something you can always refer back. And then you go back before you plant the following year and you look at it and go, this worked really well, and this didn't work very well. And so you can make those proper adjustments. But having history really works well. And then you can say, if you also map out your garden, you can say, well, I tried these new tomatoes, but I'm going to say you may forget what they were. This map will have that on there. I planted beefsteak, and they didn't do very well. But I planted a different type of tomato, and it did wonderfully. And everybody liked them. They grew really well. And I want to make sure I can go back and get that again next year. So when we're looking at all of the possibilities, and you'll look at even things, some squash, well, it's zucchini, but it'll be somebody's brand or somebody's proprietary zucchini, and it's better. And you're going to look for that because you found that is a better zucchini. It works better for me. It's got more flavor. It grows to the right size and length. It doesn't get too big, but it'll get out to a nice little 8 to 10 inch, about 1.5 inches to 2 inches around. It's perfect for what you use it for. Then you're going to go into that kind of stuff. And so your garden becomes your map, and we start to map it out.
Like Bill just said, now he's going to be talking about how your garden really is a map of your garden. What you choose to plant in your garden is the map of your garden, and how it's very important to keep track of what is actually in your garden and where it is in your garden.
The next thing you do is, okay, what kind of a surface do I want to plant for my lettuce, which is much different than what I would use for my squash, and extremely different from what I'd want to do for a melon. So we begin to find out, okay, I want to put out lettuce, and we're going to put it down these 3 lines for 8 feet. We're just taking a rough idea of that's how far we want, because we want a lot of lettuce. We're going to put red leaf, we're going to put butter, we're going to get green leaf, and we're going to put them in these rows. Well, what we want to do is put a small bed, somewhere that's probably something like 4 to 6 inches across, and then it's going to have rows, the irrigation rows that we're going to create here down the middle, and you're going to be able to put, and they need to be 3 to 4 inches above the bottom of the row. Okay, so you're going to have it like a hill, but it's going to be solid, and it's going to be a bed. One thing that makes it really good is that then, there's a lot of things you can do. We want to simplify things rather than run water. Is you can put, and there's a lot of them out there, and they work really well. I've had them in my own, is drip hoses. And you can put a manifold, and we'll talk about designing irrigation systems later, but I'm talking about these rows because you can lay down that drip hose down there, and you can turn it on, and you can watch and see how long it takes to saturate from one side of the road to the other. Once you get there, you get your bed moist, and once it's moist like that, then you can keep it that way to the proper amount of irrigation. And irrigation will be a whole chapter all by itself. But I'm just telling you, it makes it. Or you can do simplify, which is you just get a hose. And a good way to put it is so that it doesn't, the force of the water coming out the end of your hose doesn't do that. Put it into like a coffee can. I mean, that used to be more prevalent, but some type of can that, and it could be plastic, it can be metal, doesn't make any difference. And you turn that water on gently into that, and it'll kind of push it out and just run gently down your row. At the end of the row, you'll put in a stop, and you can fill that bed up. And once that bed is filled, turn it off. It'll soak into that, and the faster it soaks, the better you're going to have, because you're going to get air back into that soil to make those plants want to grow some more. Once it starts to, we don't want to overwater. In other words, is what we're trying to say. So when you're looking at this, you're going to put, those are if we're making small raised beds.
Now Bill's going to talk about kind of what it's supposed to look like whenever you're planting larger plants in your garden rather than smaller plants.
Okay, now if you're going to put something like a squash plant, you're going to want to put something, eggplant, squash, these are all more, you're not going to have as many plants. So what you're going to want to do is put those plants up on a hill, circular watering system like a moat all the way around it, so you can fill that moat up and let it, soak in to the hill and keep it moist. It'll also, when you first start doing this, it'll chase the water back out. So those roots will expand back towards the moat, because that's where the water will dry up at the end. And so it'll follow that water till follow the moisture back out until you irrigate it again. And so those kind of crops are really good to put up on hills. Tomatoes, another one that's great up on a hill, but because for space considerations, those tomatoes will just branch out and go everywhere. It's nice to put some type of a little cone over them, that's wire cone that basically they can go through, big enough so you can get your hands in to get to your tomatoes, but also up on a hill. And much the same way as you can do this. You don't want to get those tomatoes down into the water. It's the other thing. That's another reason you want them up on a hill, because then you'll start to get things like, rot. If you're short of calcium in that soil, you can get blossom end rot really quickly. There's several things that you'll get that will be detrimental if those tomatoes are getting down into the water. The same thing would be on melons. And I'm going to tell you, you're going to need a 10 by 10. It's not going to be much if you're planting a lot of different varieties of vegetables. If you try to do melons, they take up a lot of space. They need to branch out and go in a lot of area, and then they'll settle on those. And so when you lay out these, if you're looking to do that, a lot of times it's nice just to have its own separate little raised bed that you can put in, or a section of the garden that you can keep it.
Now Bill's going to talk a little bit about some of the added bonuses of having a raised bed garden.
One of the things that's nice about a raised bed, it's pretty easy to keep the critters out of, the gophers, squirrels, or things like dogs, cats, from getting in there. They're easy to maintain. You can put up a really light fence around them, as opposed to putting them ground level. Ground level, you'll have the entrance of some of these things like gophers and voles and that kind of thing, which can really raise havoc because they love eating these tender roots. So that's another reason for this raised bed, that you can keep them out. The other thing when you're doing that is make sure that you're keeping your vegetables easy to get to. So if I put a raised bed and it's a 20 by 20, well, you're going to have difficulty getting in 10 feet without tearing it all down and being able to walk down through it, as opposed to if they're 10 foot wide and 20 foot long, and another one that's 10 foot wide, you can get in and reach in 4 or 5 feet. And so it makes it much easier to work with when it goes to harvesting, or when you need to get in a weed or any of those things. You can do it from the outside of those raised beds, particularly if that bed is, like I talked about, up at 2 feet or taller. Then you're going to have to get a little step stool to walk up to get into your garden. This way, if you keep them narrow and long, they'll work a lot better.
Now Bill's going to talk about why planning your garden is so important, as well as how planning your garden can lead to you actually finding out that, I think I actually really like the food that I'm growing, and the food that I'm growing, I didn't know I could like even more than I already did before.
Planning your garden becomes really critical because, if you've not gardened much, one of the things you'll find if you enjoy it is you're always looking for something new and different to plant. I didn't know until I was, grown almost, that there was a lot of things I really liked that were in a garden that I had never tried before. I've worked with large vegetable growers that one particularly had 50 different kinds of vegetables on their acreage, and it was a fairly substantial acreage of 1,000. And I think they got bigger, up to 1,300 acres, and they were always tried to maintain this variety, and that was their little niche that people in supermarkets could call them from all over and get a lot of these different vegetables that you might not. Some are like Korean vegetables and other Asian vegetables, and then there's radicchio, and there's hot mustard, and there's it just goes on and on and on. So there's a lot of things that you may find that you want to try, and I always like to have part of my garden as an experimental area. I've never tried that, and I've never seen that grow, or I've never, I've tried that, but I've never tried to grow it. I've used, bought it in the store and liked it, and now I have an opportunity to look at that.
Now Bill's going to get into talking about some root crops.
The other thing, if you're having difficulty with what I call deep-rooted crops, where you are growing the crop to harvest the root. What do I mean by that? Well, if you do a carrot, you're harvesting the root of it. So you're going to make sure that carrot goes down, and can penetrate. If you have hard pan, guess what? It'll go down to that, and then it'll go sideways, and it'll look really crazy. You'll have a long shaft, and then when it hits the hard pan, it'll start to grow, horizontally rather than continue to grow vertically. So when you do that, you got to make sure that if I want to grow a carrot, I got to have that much soil, and I got to have it soft enough that it can grow through. You can also have things like turnips, which are great, and they'll grow, and beets. But there's a market also for turnip greens, and also a market for beet tops. So some people will like to harvest beets and have both the tops and the bottoms. So there's more that you can grow there. So always remember and we'll talk later when we talk about the nutrition. We're going to do a general course on nutrition, is to be able to feed the crop for what you want that crop to do. If I need a rooted crop, I want to make sure I have plenty of phosphate. This is just an example. But if I want something needs standability, I have to make sure I have plenty of potassium there, like a sweet corn. I need something to keep that stalk where it can grow lignin, and I have some other nutrients. So we'll go through that so that you can kind of say, I've got to pay extra attention to these elements when I'm trying to grow those crops. So hopefully it'll give you some idea. If you don't plan a garden will plan you. And you won't be happy with a lot of times, and you won't have the fun and the really rewarding thing of growing highly nutritious vegetables that you can consume for you and your family. But it starts with good planning. Remember I talked about getting soil samples? It's part of the plan. Planning out how I'm going to plant it, and then remembering by putting out an actual map of what is where in your garden, so that you can go back and say, yeah, I really like that. We'll make sure we'll circle that and put it off to the side. We want to make sure we do that again next year. We planted some in May, and it didn't do very well. But when we start looking, it would have been better if we'd have planted it in late March or early April. And that would have made all the difference in the world. So till next time, I'm going to let you go. Hopefully you're going to have fun this year with your garden.
Thanks for another fantastic episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, Bill. I'm sure that everyone listening absolutely loved what you had to say about gardening and how to set up your plot, as well as the different intricacies of setting up your plot. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and always stay curious.